Hi, everyone, and welcome to One Voice Evolving podcast, where we reclaim joy in DEI spaces. Here we interview guests who are raw, real, and relatable, shifting the conversation from head to heart for white women who care about racial equity. I'm Kim Brasser, your host, and today the topic is good grief, the intersection of religion, rights, and racism. Our guest this week is author Melody LeBaron, who wrote Transforming Death, Creating Sacred Space. She brings a distinct background and describes how the intersection of privilege, patriarchy, and colonialism intersect with her spirituality and activism in today's world. The unique part is the intersection of the grief work that she has done on end of life and the way that we experience that grief in our bodies, both individually and communally in our societal constructs, whether that's patriarchy or colonialism or racism or religion. And we talk about all of those things and the intersection and the evolution of a life through all of that and how that makes us uniquely equipped today to make a difference in advancing racial equity in our lifetime. Melody specializes in helping white women feel motivated to explore their own consciousness and release old conditioning. She explains practical ways through somatic healing or body work for clearing grief in our individual and collective pain. Be sure to visit our website at onevoiceevolving.com/resources for her recommendations. Enjoy and let us know what you thought.
In 2020,
Yes.
I was publishing a book called Transforming Death, Creating Sacred Space for the Dying. And it was based on my years of working with the dying and the grieving. And my publicist was insistent that all of the racial equity content that I was pouring onto my Facebook page, my personal page, go somewhere else. And so I created a group. And it was, I think, racial equity and social justice.
Mhm.
And I had that for, it was at least 2 years. And we were sharing really good content. And then in, I think it was 2023, maybe end of 2022, Facebook changed the rules. And it became easier for bots to infiltrate your groups. And my group was infiltrated by bots, by people spamming. And I did not have it would have taken me a half hour to an hour a day to filter out all the spammy messages. And so I just closed the group at that point.
Okay, so when I reached out to you originally, it was to say, are you still doing racial equity work? Or I see you're not. And you said, oh, no, I'm still doing it, just not there. And
Right.
so it just dovetailed nicely because as I've been working with women coming through their own journey of racial equity and then meeting people who've been 25 years in DEI and maybe burning out, maybe discouraged, maybe more so in 24 than they were in 22. And it was the first time when I opened One Voice Evolving on Facebook that I actually got censored for using the word racial equity or social justice. And that blew my white bubble right out of the water because I've talked about all kind of things in all kind of ways on Facebook, especially in 12 years. Never one time did they refuse an ad or say, you can't say that here.
Right.
And I'm pretty middle of the road. So I would love for today's conversation to be about how do you navigate grief with the death of the dream of what you thought was going to happen from all your hard work and efforts.
Well, yeah. Um, how we do that, I believe, is in community and is also in the recognition that you and I, and even our children or grandchildren, may not live long enough to see the day that we have racial equity in this country, that we have social justice in this country, that we have the more beautiful world our hearts know is possible. but I have a better regulated nervous system if I, in community, keep working toward that. I cannot base my um, how do I feel about this on the result we're getting. I have to base it on, have I taken action today? In my 69 years, I have moved 30 times around the US and Canada. So I've had many homes. Now, I was fortunate to have my high school years in Hartsdale, New York, which is sort of a suburb of, we're just on the wrong side of the tracks from Scarsdale in Westchester County. And I went to a mostly Black high school. I had the privilege of really having there was a group of Black and white educators that had gotten together through the worst of the civil rights movement in the 60s and formed this school board and created a brand new high school. 1968. I'm a 13-year-old, under 5 foot tall. I'm the oldest of 7 kids, so I didn't have an older sibling to tell me what high school was like. So I'm scared. And I go to my parents elected, they could have sent me to the all-white high school, but they elected to have me go to this new integrated school. And the first 2 months of high school were race riots. Now, my parents had raised me in a really ultra conservative patriarchal cult. And part of that was not exposing us to the national news. I remember the landing on the moon. And I remember going to the neighbor's house to watch TV when President Kennedy was shot and for his funeral. But other than that, I had never been exposed to the news. And all of a sudden, what's happening in front of me in high school, and kids are getting in fights. A Black woman chopped off a white girl's long, pretty blonde hair because the white girl liked the Black girl's boyfriend. I mean, I didn't understand what I was looking at. And so I saved up my babysitting money and bought a transistor radio that I hid from my parents and started listening to the news. And then my school, these educators were just amazing. So during class, there were some areas of the school it wasn't safe to be. There was a lot of unrest, but in the auditorium was a safe zone. And many teachers took the students to the auditorium for these sit-ins where students could explain why they were so angry and upset. And I started hearing about redlining, and I started hearing about the differences in what happened with the GI Bill with their dads. And all of a sudden, my eyes are opened, and I realize that my Black classmates in high school have had a much different growing up experience than my little white conservative patriarchal cult and friends there had had. And so I had this experience of strong diversity, lots of learning. And then, of course, I go out to the church's college, and it was all white. It was very conservative. It was all white. And I felt like a sore thumb. I felt like I did not belong. I only stayed a year because I just felt like I didn't belong. And I got married at 18 and did the whole church thing of having lots of children. And each baby was born in a different state because my then husband was climbing the corporate ladder. So in every place where we've lived and worshiped over the last 30 moves, I've had the privilege of, of working and playing and worshiping in places of diversity. And my current husband and I married 22 years ago, and we met in Orlando, made our way to Atlanta, and in 2017, he retired, and we were choosing our retirement home, and we both wanted to live in the mountains and went up and down the East Coast, visiting all the mountains. And we wanted to be in a close radius to all of our kids. Well, we chose Asheville. And when we were house hunting and we were downtown, there was plenty of diversity. So I thought, well, good, this is what we want. Now, one of the places we actually looked for a home is North Georgia. And that would have been the easiest place for us to move. An hour north of where we had lived, we could keep all of our doctors, our friend circles. We would have just been a bit further away up in the mountains. Well, we looked with a realtor, we chose a home, and then we walked into a restaurant for a meal. And there were Confederate flags all over the place. There were Kill Hillary. This was during the 2016 election. Um, there was a lot going on, and we saw things we didn't resonate with. But when we went into this restaurant, there was a big group of men all sitting around in a big round table, and they all had on shirts with a Confederate flag flying over Capitol Hill and the saying, "I have a dream." And I looked at my husband and I said, I don't think this is the right place for us. And then we started going out, church shopping, checking out local venues, seeing where we might fit, where we might sink roots in the community. And I realized that Asheville is very segregated. It is the most segregated of any place I've ever lived, including Southern Alberta, little farming communities where I've lived. So I kind of was in the inquiry of why, and we chose a church, but I spoke with one of the ministers and I said, listen, you have 3 Black people. Now, I know there's more Black people in Asheville, but what's going on with your church's racial equity um, movement? And it was a church, it was the biggest church for social justice in Western North Carolina. And they were very proud of that. And the minister said, well, yeah, it's a problem. It's an issue. Would you like to join the church and head up the racial equity team? And I thought about it and I said, yes, I'll do that. So we dove in right at the beginning, pre-pandemic, to some racial equity work. Yeah, we moved to a place. Asheville is like this little blue dot in a very red state.
Yeah.
And because my husband and I couldn't afford to live in Asheville, we're in one of the outlying communities, which used to be very rural. Um, Many of our neighbors are not happy about how their community is changing. At the church in 2019 and 2020, I hosted a racial trauma resiliency training. And this training was for Black and Brown people in Asheville to come together and to talk about their experience with the police and their experience with systemic injustice. And I was just there to open the building, make sure the food was there, get the room set up. And the first couple of nights, I just was on my computer in another room. And then they invited me to come into the room. I was one of 2 people, 2 white people, invited into this sacred circle where this is when I left the patriarchal cult in my 40s. I graduated myself. Uh, in 2010 is when my priestess training began. And that put me on a path to really examine the internalized patriarchy. Now, when we look at our history, if we look back, there's a wonderful book called The Alphabet versus the Goddess that looks at every single culture across the world when the alphabet was brought in. Now, you and I are probably the most familiar with Moses coming down off the mount with tablets inscribed in stone, that thou shalt have no graven images and no other gods to be worshipped before me, and all of this. Well, it was the first record of the alphabet, right, in that culture. And what you see is across the world, as the alphabet is introduced and people have to begin to read, the left brain becomes dominant. And all of a sudden, people across cultures begin to be willing to kill each other for their beliefs, not for land, not for women, for their beliefs. And so you see this, and the Old Testament is filled with incidents of patriarchy, justifying the murder and rape of women and children who had different beliefs. Like, patriarchy sets up a one up, one down paradigm, a dominator submissive paradigm. And it's not just that men are to be dominant and women are submissive, it's that left brain is to be dominant and right brain, holistic, creative, intuitive. The right brain knows we're all connected. That is to be submissive to the logic. So as I began doing the inner work, I dove deeper into racial equity work. The circles that I was moving in the early 2010s, with Elisa Starkweather and some of my other teachers, really were doing racial equity work in women's circles. So by the time we get here, I have recognized my own internalized patriarchy, internalized colonialism, and internalized white supremacy. So now I'm standing at the pulpit on Sundays talking about this. There's a graphic that I had on the overhead one Sunday, and it was, I'm sure you've seen it. It's the iceberg of white supremacy culture. And at the very top, you've got the KKK, you've got white supremacists, but down here, you've got all this. If it doesn't happen to me, and if it's not happening to someone I love, I'm not going to pay attention to it. The sort of Karen mentality of things are fine for me. I know things aren't great for my Black neighbors, but white supremacy it is designed and created to be invisible to white people, unless we pull back the blinders and go looking for it. So here I am at the pulpit on Sundays, pulling back the blinders, and I'm passing out flyers and information afterwards at the door. And several, big white men are really in a huff and angry with me and saying, these are words that should never be spoken in church and blah, 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 and we're not going to come back. So I tell the minister, this happened. Some people were very unhappy with my remarks, and I guess you should decide if you want me to continue this. And his response was, oh, we may lose some people, but those are the ones we want to lose. You just keep right on. You got a good message. So I carried right on. I was then invited to the Asheville Interfaith Initiative on dismantling racism. Now, the group had been in existence for several months. The year before, most of them had, and they were mostly white people. There was only 2 people of color. Have you been there, Kim, to the Memorial for Truth and Justice?
I have not, no.
Every white person in this country needs to go. It is a breathtaking, very disturbing account of history in this country, the kind of history that most people have been able to not see. And so they had all gone together. Now, for every person lynched in the US that they have records for, this memorial has county by county and these big brass pillars hanging down in this memorial with their names. And then planted horizontally on the hillside outside the memorial are the same replicas, county by county, with all the names of the lynched. And this Center for Truth and Justice, the counties are being invited to reclaim these memorials. And so this group who had been there had talked about making the work of this group, going through the protocol that you had to go through for this center to officially display the memorial in Buncombe County, where I live. And so I go to the first meeting, and they are discussing this as the, as the effort they may want to do. And I look around the room and I see all white people except one person of color. And I say, well, is this what the Black people and the brown people in Asheville want? Is this reclaiming of this memorial? I realize I hadn't been there yet. I've since been there, and it's truly that whole process of reclaiming the pillar, which we did, a different group did in Buncombe County. It was done in a good way, and it really expanded, took the blinders off for many people. It was a real good part of our racial equity shift in the community. But at that time, I said, is this really what the Black people and brown people in Asheville want? And if it's not, I just can't be a party to this. If we're going to try to do if we're an effort to dismantle racism, I'm not going to participate in some white saviorism. It's called Building Bridges. And it basically is the history of racism in Asheville. And it was an 8-week course. And I got to see during this 8-week course some of those exact same Black and brown leaders that I had interviewed, sharing their larger experience in the course to these hundreds of people. A racial equity organization in Greensboro, North Carolina, called Racial Equity Institute. Okay. And they do amazing, there's like a 3-hour workshop, and then there's full day seminars. So I did a series of their work, and the first one, Groundwater, is just a brief sort of look at, here is, systemic racism is in the groundwater of this country, and here are some of the results. And it's just heart-rending. In this program, I mean, I was not the only white woman sitting in this audience, just weeping and angry. So then, I did their multi-day seminars. Then 2020 hit, and the pandemic, and George Floyd, and all of a sudden everyone is interested in racial equity and in DEI. And so we've got a lot of, by this time, the church is doing a lot. And by this time, the other thing I realized about that dismantling racism, that interfaith initiative, it was only meant to have been a 1-year project. And I just complained about that. I was like, there's no way that we can make a dent because after we did the interviews, we had a list of things that these Black leaders wanted us to focus attention on. So it turned into a 3-year project before I was outvoted and we shut down. Dismantling racism is a lot of white saviorism by white-led nonprofits. And white-led nonprofits are actually quite destructive to the Black and brown communities they serve. Even when they have Black and brown people on staff, unless those Black and brown people are in positions of leadership. So we compiled a list of all the Black and brown led nonprofits. We did all of this sleuthing and putting together a list of resources for churches that is still being updated and used. And so I feel good about that 3-year contribution. And I'm still connected to the people I served with. Just a few days ago, some other women, white women, who are in the racial equity space with me, doing local work here in the community. And we're very busy professionally, all of us. But we also have a passion for this work. And we gathered together to do like some check-ins and to see where we are and hold each other's hearts and keep each other motivated for this. And I have Black and brown friends that I see regularly, that I am there in a kind of a support for them. Where do you want me to put my attention? There's an organization called RJC, Racial Justice Coalition. It's national. It's across the US. Government Accountability Project. And several of us are volunteering our time, just a little bit of time a week, but basically we either attend the committee meetings, because I don't know about where you live or where our listeners live, but a lot of the decisions that keep systemic injustice in place do not happen in front of the cameras. They happen behind closed doors in committee meetings. And a lot of it happens because most counties and city governments are not collecting data. They're not collecting data about how their policies are affecting different populations. Well, so every week, the people who attend the meetings share their notes, and they get transcribed, and the emails get sent out, and there's an action that I can take. Usually it only takes 3 minutes to send this letter to the county commissioner or to send that letter to the city government. Well, Asheville in the 60s, 50s, 60s, and 70s was 46% Black. It's now, it was 13% Black when we moved here, and it's now much less than that. Asheville is hemorrhaging people of color, and it is by design.
When somebody gets stuck in their go forward, let's say they've been doing this work or just starting, and they start to make forward momentum, and then they get a troll or they get a bot or they get a pushback or they get internal resistance they can't identify, and it's not safe out there, but it's safe in my little white bubble. How do you help them recognize that change means letting go of something old so something new can happen? How can they navigate that before they burn out or bail?
Yeah. And burnout is a real thing. Burnout is a real thing. I would say that I've experienced it twice in the last 10 years. And one of the things, I've always had a physical / spiritual practice. Now, my practice has evolved and changed over the years, but there are some constants. There's this thing called a dead ball, and it's an 8-pound weighted ball, and you can't kill it. And so this dead ball has been one of the best parts, easiest parts of my resiliency, my grief practice. Because when I get depressed, it's usually because I've got unintegrated anger, and either anger at myself or anger at something outside of me. And I will go and lay out my mat in the garage, or sometimes I've done it here in my office, with a pad under my knees. And I take that 8-pound ball up over my head and slam it down. And I will call out the names of the white supremacists I know. I will call out the names of the folks and the ideologies I'm angry at. And so doing this completes the stress cycle, because whenever we've got, depressing news or something in our personal lives, something in our community that is difficult, we've got stress hormones in our body that do not get released until we complete the stress cycle. So for me, I use a dead ball. I facilitate grief retreats, in person as well as online, for people or organizations who are grieving a loss. And so I have a whole playlist of music that we move to, because movement is part of allowing the grief to move through our bodies. The body must release what is going on. Then, usually after I have released the lower, like the real difficult anger and rage, I'm ready to pull out my art supplies. So I do some volunteer work with local families in my community. And this is a piece of art that a little Black boy, 5 years old, did on my dining room table with me. And he and his family are going through a very difficult time. And he started with the rainbow. And he got all of the colors. 5 years old, he knew every color, after which, the next color of the rainbow. And then we started talking about his lived experience of what he was going through. And you can see that difficult time reflected in this painting. But when he got up from the table, he was smiling. His face was clear, honoring the difficult emotions, and using our powers of creation, whether it's dance or movement or breath work or painting or drawing or writing, using our powers of creation to express the grief. And then we have the resilience to move on, to go forward.
So many times when it's difficult conversations or hard feelings, or we've buried something down there because it was so painful, and knowing that if it comes back up, it threatens to overwhelm us. And so we distract rather than lean in. We pull away and we try to protect. And what you're suggesting, what I'm hearing, is a kind of somatic healing.
Yes.
The body knows, lean into that and let it take you. Yes, it's okay to be angry, and it's okay to be creative, and it's okay to cry, and it's okay to laugh and have fun. Let it all be and move through it. And I hadn't really connected those two before, but I see such wisdom in that.
Yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. For me, our bodies, our body keeps the score, not just of what has happened to our one individual life, but of what is happening also in the collective.
Our target market here is generally white women over 50. I'm looking for that, for the children are raised and that daily grind is over. And now I have energy, resources, and awareness I haven't seen before, because that menopause layer has lifted, let's just
Yes.
say. And now, in 2020, many friends of mine were drawn into the movement, but did not find the support for white women who were so ridiculously new to something that we all should have known for generations. But even that, without group support or without a community of women who are marching that path with you, it is so easy. It's just so easy when it gets hard to check out, and because I don't have to be confronted with it, I'm choosing to be, which is just it's a sucky
Yeah.
privileged thing to say.
Well, I can definitely recommend 3 racial equity leaders,
Okay,
all Black women that I follow, that I pay attention to. I repost their material.
okay.
Desiree Attaway, who I discovered after I moved to Asheville that she lives here. And yeah, I've gotten to meet her in person. Um, I've been following her for many years. Her organization is called the Attaway Group, Adaway. And then Nicole Lee, Lee, and her group programs are wonderful. And the last one is Cecile, Sacil Armstrong. And Cecile has wonderful entry-level programs for white women. And she makes this learning fun and easy. Um, she's got a wonderful, affordable program that will help white women in their conversations with other less aware white women. So honestly, those are the 3 Black leaders I'm following. And there's another woman that I follow. And I first met her in the racial equity sphere. She was co-leading a course with one of my Black teachers. And then she has gone on to write a book. She's a somatic educator,
Okay.
and she understands where white supremacy lives in the body. And she can help people. And she does these very affordable course, like an ongoing course that you can pop in and out of. But it's about taking care of your own body somatically, tuning in to your own body and developing a greater awareness and more peace and breath. And so I highly recommend to Abigail. Um, Most of her work right now is about the body and expanding the body's capacity to integrate and process grief and trauma so that you can keep yourself resilient for the work. Transforming Death, Creating Sacred Space for the Dying. And this is a book that you will definitely want to have had your family read before you die, hopefully in their care. And you will want to read before a loved one dies. So it's a book about how the room, the environment, can support and partner with the physical, mental, emotional, and departing processes of dying. And it's also a book about how you can prepare yourself if you're the one dying or if you're in the caregiving team.
Melody LeBaron, thank you so much for being with us today. It's been amazing. We're going to be out Friday at 3 o'clock on July 5th. And if this turns into a 2-parter, we'll publish the 4th and the 5th, because independence, you've been deconstructed so many things, and we appreciate that. And I think July is going to be a month of deconstruction with all my guests. So I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Well, it's a good month for this, especially as we look forward to this next election. So yes, we need to rally the women.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kim.